From Peter Frampton to Daft Punk, artists have been finding ways to alter vocals since the birth of pop music. But where did it all start, and how did we get to where we are today? G'day, I'm Bill from Enmore Audio, and today we're taking a look at the history of voice alteration. The human voice is the world's oldest instrument, and in terms of tone and distinction it's truly unparalleled. But technology like Talkboxes, Vocoders and autotune have changed the way musicians think about singing. Crude talkboxes were amongst the earliest developments in voice alteration technology. Radio operator and Gibson engineer Alvino Ray was the first to experiment with the talkbox in 1939. His technique involved taping a military-developed carbon microphone to his wife's throat. Standing behind a curtain, she would sing along to his guitar lines, modulating what he played. As intriguing as it was, the technique fizzled out, written off as something of a novelty. Gilbert Wright invented a similar product for Sonovox in the late 30s. He used tiny transducers attached to a singer's throat to pick up their vocal modulation, inspired by the sound of his voice when he spoke while shaving with an electric razor. This method was more practical than Alvino Ray's, and found some use in radio jingles and film themes. Steel guitar legend Peter Drake used another early example of talkbox for many of his albums during the 60s. His innovative technique involved modulating his guitar with his mouth, which was attached to an 8-inch speaker driver via a plastic tube and funnel. Here's what that looked like. These revolutionary sounds would go on to inspire the likes of George Harrison, Roger Troutman and Peter Frampton. Frampton became particularly smitten with the talkbox after hearing Drake's experiments. Engineer Bob Hale gifted him a 100-watt hand-built fiberglass version as a Christmas present, and he got to work mastering it, soon becoming synonymous with the effect through his virtuosic performance on Do You Feel Like We Do. Hale sold the rights to his talkbox to Dunlop in 1988, who continue to produce it to similar specs today. So that was the first stage in voice alteration, but what came next? Originally created for telecommunications purposes, the vocoder didn't have such a romantic upbringing. Developed by Bell Labs engineer Homer Dudley, it was intended to be used to transmit messages over long distances. The idea was to re-synthesize human speech, stripping it back to the essential, recognizable sounds. This way the message would take up less bandwidth along the primitive copper wires, reducing transmission time. At the start of World War II, the military quickly recognised the technology as an effective way to disguise messages. The innocent vocoder became a vital part of wartime communications, and was even used to plan the devastating nuclear bombings of Japan in 1945. After the Second World War, there were various attempts at repurposing the vocoder for music. In 1968, Robert Moog would develop a solid-state unit that would go on to feature on the soundtrack for A Clockwork Orange. How could we forget this scene?
It was the next day, brothers, and I had truly done my best morning and afternoon to play it their way, and sit like a horror show cooperative malchick in the chair of torture. Kraftwerk were quick to adopt the instrument using a Sennheiser VSM 201 on their seminal early records. Throughout the 70s, progressive rock acts like the Alan Parsons Project and Pink Floyd used vocoders too. And into the 80s it found a place with new wave artists like New Order and early hip-hop acts like African Bambaataa. These artists were already exploring the possibilities of what drum machines and synths could do, and the vocoder was a welcome addition to their musical palette. In modern times, Daft Punk have arguably been the most consistent users of the vocoder. Like Kraftwerk, the duo consider the instrument vital in their sonic identity and their man vs machine thematics. And this sort of leads us to autotune, a technology that came out around the same time as Daft Punk released Homework. Autotune brought voice alteration into the 21st century. A product of the move towards digital recording, it was developed by Antares Audio Technologies in '97. The software was initially created to auto-correct slight errors and nudge singers to the nearest semitone. But producers soon found that the tool could also be used to manipulate vocals with dramatic pitch-shifting effects. Cher's 1998 song Believe was the first pop hit to truly show off what autotune was capable of, aside from pitching vocals so that singers always seem perfectly in key. The effect was created by using an aggressive setting that corrected the pitch of the signal the moment it was received. After the success of the single, it soon became known as the Cher effect, and her producers were very secretive about how they achieved it, claiming they'd used a talkbox or vocoder.
Of course, the secret got out, and today everyone from T-Pain to Bon Iver have become synonymous with the effect. While musicians who use these technologies are still open to criticism, it's important to remember that people are always skeptical towards new things. I think Thomas Bangalter from Daft Punk put it best. A lot of people complain about musicians using autotune. It reminds me of the late 70s when musicians in France tried to ban the synthesizer. What they didn't see was that you could use those tools in a new way, instead of just replacing the instruments that came before.